Thankful for Capitalism. Hi, I'm Dave Arnott, the Christian Economist. I'm recording this on the week of Thanksgiving in the fall of 2020 as we're just coming out of the pandemic. And so what are we thankful for? Well, we have a lot to be thankful for. Psalms 107, 8 and 9 reads, "Let them give thanks to the Lord for his unfailing love and his wonderful deeds for mankind. For he satisfies the thirsty and fills the hungry with good things." What do we have thankful to be for? What do we have to be thankful for? We have a lot to be thankful for. Maybe the best 5 minutes I can suggest was watching this video by Dennis Prager on Prager University called "The Key to Unhappiness." I've referred to this so many times with so many different groups I've worked with. The key to unhappiness. But I'll summarize it for you. He said we fall into one of two groups. That's it. You either have gratitude or you feel entitled. One or the other. If you have gratitude, meaning if you're thankful, you'll be happy. If you feel entitled, you'll be unhappy. It's that simple, says Dennis Prager, and I think he's correct. And this takes us to the upcoming book by Arnott and Seidamatov called Biblical Economic Policy, where we lay out 10 economic commandments from the Bible. And number 4 is don't covet, meaning don't feel like you want something that somebody else has. As you may have noticed, this comes from the original 10 Commandments also. It's number 10 in Moses' 10 Commandments. Don't covet. Don't want what others have. And that's what Dennis Prager is saying in his video called The Key to Unhappiness. Don't have an entitlement feeling. Well, let's look at what we're thankful for. Well, my dad, Harold Arnott, started every prayer with, "Thank you for life." Yeah, we shouldn't take it for granted, should we? I was born in 1954. That's the same year that Alexander Solzhenitsyn was sent home from the prison in Tashkent because they were sure he was going to die of cancer. He was miraculously cured, and he gained a new sense of mission. He says, quote, this is Alexander Solzhenitsyn in 1954, quote, "I did not die, however, with a hopelessly neglected and acutely malignant tumor. This was a divine miracle. I could see no other explanation. Since then, all the life that has been given back to me has not been mine in the full sense. It is built around a purpose," end quote, Alexander Solzhenitsyn in 1954. So thank you for life. We have so much to be thankful for. I was meeting a friend for lunch a few years ago, and I said, "Wes, how you doing?" He said, "I'm better than any king who ever lived." I said, "That's an interesting greeting. What do you mean by that?" And now in my classes at Dallas Baptist University, I tell that little story and we talk about it. And I have a whole 45-minute lecture, which I call Scarcity versus Abundance, and say we should really concentrate on the abundance. Economics does concentrate on scarcity. We assume that everything is scarce. And that is one way of looking at the world. But there's also looking at the world from an abundance point of view, and Christians, I believe, should have this abundance view. Life is better now than any time in history, as the very first line of the book by Nobel Prize-winning economist Angus Deaton. His book is called The Great Escape, and the book is about how humans have escaped poverty because we lived in poverty for thousands of years. And now at the end of 2020, we are so rich. And Angus Deaton tries to explain this in The Great Escape. And his first line is, "Life is better now than any time in history." It is. And this is supported by a New York Times columnist named Christoph. His title, this is a couple of years ago now, his headline was, "Why 2018 was the best year for humans." Let me just give you some of the facts. This is not from his article. This actually is an excerpt from the book that Sergey and I have coming out in just a couple of months. In one section of the book, I've got a whole bunch of data here, but I'm going to give you a few of them because we only have a few minutes today. Here's a few data points. Number 1, extreme poverty fell from 18.2% of the world's population to 8.6% in one decade, in the decade that ended with 2019. This is just astounding. In the 1980s, it was 44%. Did you realize what I just said? World extreme poverty went from 44% in 1980 to 8.6% in 2019, and it's gotten even better in 2020. Number 2, globally, the gap in basic living standards is narrowing. People don't want you to believe that, but it is factually true. This comes mostly from some work by Thomas Sowell in his book Wealth, Politics, and Economics. Third fact for you. Famine has virtually gone extinct. Another one. Mortality rates for women and children have been halved just since 1990. Another one. Primary education has become near universal, almost the world over. Malaria deaths have been cut in half just since the year 2000. And in the United States, CO2 from electrical production peaked in 2007. Life is better now than any time in history. And I tell my students at the university, it's going to get better. It is going to get better. Why do we have hope? Because we're Christians. Listen, it's hard for us to consider people without hope, without a belief in a greater being. I've always felt sorry for people who had nobody to be thankful to. I was teaching in Eastern Europe in 2010, and an atheist was in my class. We had really interesting conversations. And after class, one time I asked him that question. I said, so you have a lot. He said, yeah. He was Polish, right? And the Poles were doing very well there, and he was specifically. I said, you're thankful for that? He said, yes. I said, who are you thankful to? And he said, I don't have to be thankful to anyone. You know, that just didn't make sense to me, and it still doesn't. So if you're thankful for, it seems to me that you have to be thankful to. And I've always felt sorry for non-believers on Thanksgiving week because they can be thankful for, but they have no one to be thankful to. It seems kind of empty. It seems like, they want the turkey and the football, all the things that they celebrate for Thanksgiving, but they had no one to be thankful to, and I've always felt sorry for them in that regard. Yeah. There's our second Russian in today's lesson. Let's look at Dostoevsky. He says about being ungrateful, quote, Dostoevsky wrote of humanity, quote, if he is not stupid, he is monstrously ungrateful, phenomenally ungrateful. In fact, I believe the best definition of man is the ungrateful biped. Biped meaning with two legs, end quote, Dostoevsky. So, yeah, even I've quoted two Russians already telling us how happy we should be. On Thanksgiving, the Pilgrims, you know what they were thankful for? Squanto. You need to look up the story of Squanto and how he was taken by a sea captain as a slave to Spain, was freed by some monks, ended up in the UK, ended up back in the United States, what's now the United States, ended up back in the quantity. He approaches the Pilgrims and says, hello, Englishmen, do you have any beer? That was the first thing he said to them. And see, the Pilgrims just assumed, oh, this is Providence. How can it be that the one guy we meet in this new continent speaks English? Squanto's life is such great providence that it's just amazing. And they took it, the first Pilgrims, they were very clear that God provided Squanto. And if you know his story, you know that it was provided that way. Well, at their first Thanksgiving, the Pilgrims probably brought corn and fish. They may have brought turkeys, but nobody's sure. They were sure what the Indians brought. They brought 5 deer that they had just killed. And so, that was the food. What was the game? Shooting guns. Oh, they just thought it was fantastic. And the Indians, of course, hadn't seen guns. And so they had they spent 3 days together, eating and feasting and giving thanks. Why were they giving thanks? I'll get to that in just a few minutes. So we should be thankful. I mean, Jim Dennison's blog, which I read about 4 or 5 days a week, it's really good. Jim Dennison, he says much the same thing that Dennis Prager said at the beginning of my program here today. People are either an optimist or a pessimist. Well, as Christians, we should be optimistic. We have hope. I think Americans don't quite understand this. The more you travel the world, the more you realize everybody doesn't have hope. I mean, why do we always think in America that things are going to get better? Well, it's because of our Christian underpinnings. And this comes out at Thanksgiving, but we should have this all the time. Yeah. So what are we thankful? That's what we're thankful for. I mean, one of my jokes is, worry works, meaning most of the things you worry about don't happen. So worry makes them go away. I'm kidding, right? That is true, isn't it? Worry does work. The things you worry about don't happen. You shouldn't worry about them. Not as much as you should. No, not as much as you do, right? All right, in a book I wrote with Bill Service called The Leadership Quotient, Bill was kind enough to let me write the dedication. I wrote the dedication to our students who teach us. That's the dedication of the Leadership Quotient by Dave Arnott and Bill Service. And it is fascinating. You know, we're going through this pandemic, and only half the students are in class, and we can't get together in groups as we always do, and so it's just not as fun as it used to be, and it'll come back. But anyway, it's interesting. One of my students, every day on the way out of a class, it's 8 o'clock economics class, we get out at 9:15, every day she walks out and turns to me and says, "Thank you." Now, isn't that interesting? Thank you for an economics lecture. See, she's got it figured out. She's back to this PragerU video where you can either be grateful or you can be entitled. Are you grateful to an economics lecture? For an economics lecture? Or are you entitled to it? She's grateful. She's got it figured out. What a wonderful young woman. Yeah. So we are thankful too. One student says thank you after each lecture. But we're either thankful to one of two things, God or government. And this is where it comes into the economics. Matter of fact, I've got 2 podcasts on this subject. One is podcast number 41 called In the Fed We Trust, and the other is number 21 called Economic Humanism. And I make the case in both of those, so I won't repeat it much today, that we either trust in God or government. In this case, the Fed being a part of government, if you give me that little wiggle room today, meaning, is God in control or are humans in control? And that's why number 21 is called Economic Humanism, because it seems to me that we're trusting too much in humans. And in podcast 41, I'm saying I think we trust too much in the Federal Reserve Bank and not enough in God, whom we should trust. Yep. So that first Thanksgiving, this is where we get our capitalism, and that's my topic for today. We should be thankful for capitalism. Why? Because that's what has freed people from poverty. Arthur Brooks, in his little video called The Pursuit, he says, in my lifetime, 2 billion people have been brought out of starvation-level poverty. And he stares into the camera and says, what did that? Well, it's very clear in his video, The Pursuit, that free market capitalism is what did that, says Arthur Brooks in The Pursuit. So we should be thankful for free market capitalism. That's my title today. You know, the first pilgrims were too. You know, they arrived in Jamestown in 1607 and Plymouth in 1620. Their economic system was called mercantilism. Some will pronounce it mercantilism. Heard that the other day. Thought it was pretty interesting from a European person. Mercantilism or mercantilism, as we say in the United States, meaning these these colonial companies were operated for the state, meaning either the state of England or Spain or France, wherever they came from. And so they settled here, and they had a socialist commune originally in Jamestown in 1607 and Plymouth in 1620. They had a common storehouse of grain and corn, and people would put in as they wished and took out as they wished. Sounds like communism, doesn't it? From each according to his ability, to each according to his need. And you can predict what happened. It did not work. Half of them died of starvation. Then Captain John Smith ended socialism, and he divided the land. And he quoted 2 Thessalonians 3:10 and said, he who won't work won't eat. So people started to work. You realize, see, today in 2020, as we look at, should we become more socialist? We tried this in the 17th century. In Jamestown in 1607 and Plymouth in 1620, it didn't work. And you should be able to predict that it wasn't going to work because it wasn't consistent with human nature. It wasn't going to work. So John Smith ended socialism. He divided the land. And then in Plymouth, William Bradford said, quote, by adopting the communal system, we thought we were wiser than God. End quote from William Bradford. We're not wiser than God. We should follow God's rules. So William Bradford changed to individual responsibility. Then they had a Thanksgiving. The Thanksgiving because they were thankful for what God had provided. In this Thanksgiving, we should be thankful for free market capitalism that has done so much for us and is going to continue to do so much for us. Well, then coming out of those ideas of Jamestown in 1607 and Plymouth in 1620, you get the founders of the country, Thomas Jefferson. See, in 1785, he supported the Land Ordinance of 1785, which gave private land ownership to individuals. And Alexander Hamilton, in 1791, he refused to allow the government to bail out banks in a panic of 1791 and 92, which they had started, and then wanted the government to bail them out. Alexander Hamilton said no. Benjamin Franklin is a founder. He made his fortune in printing and publishing before he got into politics. Yeah. And from that, we produced the United States, the most prosperous and free nation in the history of the world. We have a lot to be thankful for. Thank you for life. Thank you for free market capitalism. I'm Dave Arnott, the Christian Economist, where our slogan is Fear God, Tell the Truth, Earn a Profit. See you next time.